Muy buenos días y bienvenidos
Good
sean al...
morning and welcome to the TADAT podcast. My name is Annette Schmidt. From April 26 to 27, 2022, the 56th General Assembly of the Inter-American Center of Tax Administrations was held virtually with the following main theme: the current challenges of international taxation, the exchange of information as a tool to combat international tax evasion and avoidance. The participants in this General Assembly, sponsored by Argentina, included more than 300 colleagues from the 42 member countries on 4 continents, invited countries and directors of international organizations related to CIAT. CIAT is an international public non-profit organization created in 1967 with a mission of offering a comprehensive service for the modernization, strengthening, and increased use of technology of the tax administrations of its member countries. In this episode of the TADAT podcast, the first of a series of podcasts that the TADAT Secretariat, together with CIAT, will develop throughout this year, we will talk about the technical resolution of the 56th Assembly of 2022. The topics included are the mechanisms to implement this resolution, and we'll look at the results of the implementation of the resolution by the tax administrations, aimed at establishing cooperation and relations with other tax administrations. Subsequently, we'll welcome the Executive Secretary of CIAT, Marcio Ferreira Verdi, who is economist and retired tax auditor from Brazil's Federal Revenue Service. Apart from being the executive secretary of CIAT, is also currently chairing the Network of Tax Organizations, NTO, and in 2019, he was one of the first guests on our nascent TADAT podcast. Welcome back to TADAT's podcast, Marcio. Thank you very much, dear Annette. I'm very pleased to be with you once again this morning and participate in the podcast. Let me start by congratulating the whole TADAT team, particularly Justin Zake, for the very important work that is doing. And 45 years of experience in the public sector, more than 30 in the Ministry of Finance and Fiscal Affairs. As you know, it's very difficult to analyze and do a diagnostic of areas to improve. And sometimes we are actually faring better than we thought. And it's important to have aspects that we can compare. And it's very useful if we have a tool that gives us a way, like a GPS, that can guide us, that can tell us where we should go, that can serve as a basis to make progress. So I am very pleased to participate in this podcast today, this morning. Very pleased indeed. You can proceed. Let me just introduce the rest of our panel. We would also like to welcome Santiago Diez de Serralde Miguez, currently head of the Tax Studies and Research Directorate at CIAT. Santiago holds a PhD in economics and is professor of applied economics at the Rey Juan Carlos University. In 2021, he made his debut on the podcast of the TADAT podcast on the Isora tool. Welcome back to the TADAT podcast, Santiago. Thank you very much, Annette. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. and you've always worked so professionally, so we're pleased to continue working with you. Thank you, Santiago. And making his debut at the TADAT podcast, we would like to welcome Isa Gonzalo Arias Esteban, an Argentine national. He is a public accountant and holds a master's degree in financial management, a joint program of the Universidad El Salvador of Argentina and the State University of New York. Between 1998 and 2008, he held different functions in various areas of federal public revenue administration of Argentina. In 2008, he joined CIAT as a specialist in the management of tax investigations and currently works in the same organization as head of International Corporation and Taxation Directorate. Welcome to the TADAT podcast, Gonzalo. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to participate for the first time in this podcast, this TADAT podcast. Thank you, Gonzalo. Now, Marcio, could you please tell us about the importance of the CIAT General Assemblies, the history, contents, the profile of participants, the statements the GA issue, and so forth? Yes, we know that are so many challenges in the public sector, and that particularly if we're head of taxation, you don't even know with who to speak. You speak to many people every day, politicians, business people, unions, but on a daily basis, you have so many priorities to manage. You lack staff and resources. And whether it's from the political or administration point of view, they have so many challenges as a tax administration. And there's no public policy without a tax administration that functions properly. And sometimes you find that you are alone in this macro environment and you wondering how can you resolve all these challenges. So I would say that our tax administration, we see CIAT as our soul, the soul of a tax administration. And the most important is so that we can have something to base ourselves on. And therefore, CIAT is at the apex of our work, to work together in the form of a general assembly. We're more than just speaking about a specific topic. We share challenges, prospects, failures, successes, and we get to know each other. That is the main role, because as tax administrations, we can work with our peers, people who are facing the same challenges as we are on a daily basis. And it's true that CIAT was born from the fact in 1967, a program of President Kennedy, an Alliance for Progress, and in the US, there were 13 directors of tax administrations from various countries, and they realized that they didn't even know one another. They don't know who's heading up tax administrations in other countries. And that's why we say we cannot be so alone. Let us create a platform for discussion. So CIAT was created for tax administration, and later it became bigger. The General Assembly of CIAT is the very important moment for the directors of tax administrations. They can present what's new on a specific topic and have a discussion, and then share what happened in bilateral meetings where we share challenges and we try to find linkages to create synergies for cooperation. And then we feel much better when we see that we can speak together in such a platform. And the declarations, to conclude on your first topic, that's the outcome of discussions. In 1996 in the Dominican Republic, the General Assembly talked about a minimum functions for a healthy and efficient tax administration. And then we established a group of well-disposed, and that was very much welcomed by all. And since 1996, yearly, we issue a declaration with matters to reflect on, which can be useful in terms of self-assessment. If we can measure ourselves and have some guidance with thousands of other partners, wherever I'm asked to talk about the role of tax administrations, well, I can download a specific declaration on a topic, and that will give me the necessary guidance on a specific topic for reflection. And then we also have conferences. That is the magic moment of our organization. And I invite all authorities and directorate generals to meet in Grenada in the first week of October to share knowledge and to have fruitful discussions. Thank you very much. Marcio, we will take note of your invitation for October. A question for you, Santiago. Could you give us more details about the successes of the General Assembly of April 2022? Of course, it's a very big pleasure to be here. And I would like to share my screen at this stage, starting with something very simple before going into more detail. We talk about the current challenges of international taxation, exchange of information as a tool to combat international tax evasion and avoidance. So this was a specific topic that has been coming for many years as we've lately been functioning online. This meeting took place virtually over 2 days. We had an opening and we had a declaration at the end, focusing on 3 main areas. And we saw what is the role, exchanging information, how does this help us to improve compliance and better tax control, and how to avoid conflicts that in an international arena might emerge. So these were the main areas of our General Assembly. In addition, we've talked about case studies that can serve as examples.
I would have to refer here to Veronica Rondona's presentation, which was excellent. And then I will just highlight the great titles and how we might delve into them. For advanced analytical studies, the idea was how to ensure that artificial intelligence could help us in tax administration, the same for digital technologies. And we shall also hear Gonzalo shortly on the latter. And in terms of public administration that is of particular interest to tax administration, that is another area, although that has not been completed up to now. Oscar Borgue of Paraguay spoke for his part on how we might work towards the global forum on the exchange of information as to required data. Then there were different blocks, there were different panels set up to establish these. The greatest authority in Dominican Republic headed up one, and we had speakers from France, from Argentina, Portugal, and Ecuador, Uruguay, and also Ms. Pineda of the Inter-American Development Bank. All of this from the international perspective, exchange of tax information, the Punta del Este declaration, country. We went very quickly on these, but in every case, we ended up with a good public debate and feedback from the speakers. The next day, we focused on the CIAT network on international taxes, and the head of Chile tax administration, as well as Mexico from the SAT, concentrated on the contribution of B in Pillar 1. Then we looked at conflicts. But of course, we wanted to delve into how that information could be fed into compliance. We heard from Barbados, Colombia, Peru, the United States, and from CIAT as well, the head of the mission in Spain, Mariano Rojo. We also held a session on the work being carried out as to ethics. Yet again, we touched on specific issues, the oversight on major transnational organizations, the question of the mining sector in Peru, various risks that have arisen in the United States, and impact on the exporters. And finally, the question of prevention and conflict resolution in this international context. We were very proud to have the head of the Trinidad and Tobago services, India, Guatemala, Panama, and Canada also offered wonderful input. In the case of India, we looked at a joint resolution that was being expected. Spain spoke about the challenges to the Spanish tax administration. Guatemala focused on conflict resolution and tax issues and others. Finally, we heard from the head of the tax administration in Jamaica and also from the head of tax administration from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. There we looked at tax statistics with regard to income in the case of Latin America and the Caribbean. Finally, at the closing session, the leading authorities of CIAT participated, and the organizers of the following, the Inter-American and the coming General Assembly in Cuba. All of this has served to stir great interest in what we're doing, because very few events could give us such a broad sweep and such a clear vision of who we are and what we're doing and why. But to complete that picture, I would suggest it would be very useful for you to peruse the website, where you will be able to tap into the presentations of all of the speakers in Spanish and in English, and in general, a number of other contributions over the course of a year from various different tax administrations and international organizations. You will also see the latest publications and treaties under these various headings. For instance, if you want data as to CIAT, you can tap into what the different tax rates are in the region, what does tax collection look like, what are the expenses that are generated, and how are these analyzed. You also have a compendium of all of the tax codes of the region, treaties that have been signed, and tax management in general. So ESORA, the International on Tax Administrations, gives you an international view of the subject. There are many other issues as well, by the way. This is but a smattering. And in English as well as Spanish, you have the full compendium that you may wish to look into, transfer prices, a monitoring of the BEPS, international or transnational cases, transparency and cooperation in the area. And all of this, of course, along with publications. You may think this is a bit much, but I assure you it will be well worth your reading. You have everything at your fingertips on this website with the full collaboration of the various tax administrations reflected therein. Again, the international meeting that we just held and that I have commented upon is also picked up here, but so too the previous ones. Once you get into the Assembly website, you have all of them, one after the other, again, generally in both English and Spanish, occasionally in only one or the other of these two languages, but the norm is both. Naturally, I remain at your disposal if you wish any further information, but I can assure you that we are here to focus on the international affairs. We don't finance these directly. Each of the countries has to find out where to tap the necessary resources to go forward. We are not a source of financing, but we are a source of policy advice and networking. And thanks to the NTO, the network of tax organizations, we are off to a very good start. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Santiago. That was most valuable. A good overview, and I can echo what has just been said. Tap into the CIAT website. Now, Santiago, this 56th General Assembly of CIAT has focused on a number of challenges. Given the title and the focus of this General Assembly, I want to ask you what your thoughts are as to why this subject was chosen as a priority. Thank you, Annette. That is an excellent question, and it dovetails nicely with what Santiago has just said. Under the auspices of the Argentinian authorities, we focus particularly, yes, on a number of different issues that are of general interest, but especially on the particular juncture we find ourselves in internationally. And you will be able to see how pertinent, for instance, our focus on internationalization is. This has grown and consolidated over the last decades. So too, public expenditure as a result of the international finance crisis. We had only just gotten out of that when we fell into the next crisis, which was COVID. And so the use of tax resources has to be looked at, not necessarily in the generation of new taxes, but on the better use, the better application of those that have been garnered. From there, we have also questions such as different scandals that have arisen as a result of information that has been leaked. Today, it's not a question of whether or not to apply the international standards of transparency and implementation. It is very much a question of upholding them and also to improve international cooperation. The International Global Forum on these continue to focus on how the agreements should best be implemented at various levels. Now, a positive impact of the standards of transparency and implementation has been the fact that information that could not be tapped earlier is now available for application domestically. Countries, for instance, that were able to tap into the formerly bank secrecy laws have moved forward. That was not often the case. Even if some find it difficult to believe, it's almost hard to imagine these days that any tax administration could be blocked from tapping into information in their own country on these issues. But it used to be the case. As I've said, all of this is extremely complex. And in order to determine where the risks lie, it is important to have a good sense of where these pitfalls actually exist, not just domestically, but internationally. You might think, well, now, wait a minute. I can imagine that with the vast authority granted to tax administrations, a certain local business should be able to be pressed into coughing up the information requested, but that is not necessarily the case. And the need to come up with information that may not have anything to do with a local company but comes from other places also poses problems because it isn't always easy to prove that the two are connected. So countries come up against a series of difficulties also with respect to transfer prices inter alia. Generally, therefore, in broad terms, it's access to information that poses problems, and then a better grasp of the mechanisms involved. Let me give you an example so that you have a sense of the complexity involved. Now, this is a textbook example, but I think it will serve to underscore the complexity of the issue. When you have a country of a very high tax rate where companies have or where the country that has through its companies different presence in the world through perhaps tax havens, and where the operations might be financing or the development of tangibles or the sale of goods and services, logistical services or administration services, which in the particular tax haven will generate income, royalties, and all of those, that profit that is accumulating in the tax havens, of course, is not very highly taxed, if at all, depending on the agreements that may or may not exist between that particular tax haven and the country in question. There, the rates may vary. The presence of a particular company may not be considered permanent enough to be subject to this or that particular charge. But there are costs and charges that might be the result of certain activities in that same tax haven in order to start eroding the base on which the income tax is calculated. So how do you do this? How does one move forward? If one repatriates profits from a particular taxpayer, therefore paying either low income tax or deferred income tax, this may or may not, depending on how deeply controlled these elements are, to whether or not the income may be subject to deductions or may be in fact labeled as capital profits, capital gains in one country or not in another. and perhaps a particular entity is considered to be the proprietor in one country, but not in another. How can any tax administration realize what's going on, basically, in the different contexts? Without sufficient international organization, this is the answer, that would be impossible. So it's important that if we stay in touch above and beyond the need to exchange information, but for Latin America and the area where CIAT is, it's important to beef up our mutual assistance and simultaneous audits, joint audits, audits abroad, bringing countries together as to a particular control system holistically to see how a particular group actually operates internationally and get the necessary risk indicators and various other data. All of this, I think, is very interesting. The good news is the region has progressed greatly. We now have the multilateral convention of the mutual assistance and cooperation from OECD with more than 5 counterparts, but we need to decide moving forward what to do. 15 years ago, there were hardly any, 1 or 2 agreements to avoid double taxation or the flow of information. But by the same token, challenges remain.
The big challenge is automatic sharing of information and the use of that information subsequently, and other mechanisms continue to be very complex. And then an outstanding issue that Santiago referred to on our agenda is the culture to use more and more internationally available information in the public domain that enables to improve the way we use international agreements in processing information. So we have that as a very important tool of more than 400 sources of information from 45 countries, and that's very important for our member states. Therefore, the international agenda is making headway, and today more in countries are working on transparency of crypto assets, and the countries that are not making progress together at the same pace as others, we provide support as the international community demands more transparency. The Punta del Este declaration promoted by Inter-American Bank of Development, OECD, is lined up with our CIAT resolution. The idea is to keep this topic among the top priorities of governments and tax administrations. And I think for that reason, after this very long explanation, we can say that this is a very important theme when we talk about international taxation. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Let me just go a little bit further. Which recommendations of the technical resolution pose the greatest challenges to the developing country members of CIAT, and why? Now, if we look at the CIAT resolution and we compare it to other resolutions, we can see that this resolution is the most comprehensive in relation to the original version. We can even say the final version is even longer. So we have many challenges. And it depends on the specific situation in the country. There are countries that are more developed, such as Mexico. Others are just starting. So the challenges depend on the characteristics of each country. We talked about exchange of information, which is a big challenge, but it's a cross-cutting challenge. And then there are other topics that are related to that. We cannot see exchange of information as an isolated topic. There are other topics that are very important how to use the exchange information. That can be even more complex. We have to have a databases of tax administrations. And the second theme in the resolution has to do with identifying risks and then managing those risks. What are the shortcomings currently? All tax administration find challenges with identifying risks. How can we do this better? And many tax administrations are looking at best practices, but it's very difficult to implement this so swiftly and how to have quality information. But we know we need to analyze the information, and with all that, define several actions for example, critical taxpayers. Therefore, the topic of internet taxation poses a big challenge because it's not only dealing with the larger macro level, but there are also other economic groups and businesses, and you have to really zoom in on all of those. And there are countries that are at different levels. And third aspect that is a challenge and also related to the topic has to do with taxpayers themselves. We don't have a long culture to have a relationship between the tax administration and large taxpayers. So it's not good for companies to have a close relationship with a tax administration, but that was in the past. This is changing. This can help to avoid disputes, treat challenges in real time, create more certainty. And here, although for the majority of the countries, this remains a challenge to implement cooperation treaties and then go further with international cooperation as proposed by the OECD. And, for example, carry out joint audits to identify risks, the identification and promotion of frameworks of compliance of multinational companies. That means motivating multinationals to pay such corporate tax. This has to do with transparency. And then there are international platforms for exchange of information. There are very good examples from our region. I would like to mention the United Kingdom that have a platform of exchanging taxpayer information, but also working together as assessors, because the point of view might be different. So another aspect has to do with dispute resolution. Here I'm referring to international disputes. That's part of the international conventions. What does the resolution say? The rules of resolving dispute are very difficult. When there are double taxation, we have new conventions. Some of them have become obsolete. And for one reason or another, they have not led to mutual agreements on double taxation. So this is still outstanding business, and it's a great opportunity for countries to have to comply with a minimum standard in that regard. And there are many best practices and minimum standards on access to mutual agreements. The countries have to wait sometimes for mandatory arbitration. There are many challenges to motivate them to have these mutual agreements. But we have to remember that they come from a different points of view. And then there's the last topic that has to do with the digital economy. The digital economy is also included in the resolution. And in terms of challenges, this means to understand the complexities of Pillar 1 and 2 and everything discussed at the OECD to define internal criteria for governments to defend their interests. This is another outstanding business, and we cannot rest on our laurels. These have to be implemented by 2024. Then there are also direct taxation. We have international conventions on VAT, for example. How do we tax digital companies that have digital goods and services? There's an interesting work done by the World Bank, the Inter-American Bank of Development, OECD, of course, on how to implement this. And then we have a software. So this is both a challenge and an opportunity. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Now, another question. On which areas covered by the resolution have countries of Latin America and the Caribbean made most progress? Well, this is easier to answer. I can say a little bit less because I've already said a lot. Exchange of information, we have made significant progress. We talked about identifying beneficial ownership, the use of information, and the proceeds of corruption, and then the use of information. And we've also made significant progress in VAT taxation, businesses that don't have any economic presence. And we talk about digital services. Ever more countries are implementing mechanisms for payment methods, and as CIAT is promoting to have registries of these large taxpayers. What's difficult is when we have digital services, how to tax these, whether we're dealing with individuals or legal entities in terms of risk management, cooperation, dispute resolution, and asymmetric development. We have made significant progress on standardization, but a lot remains to be done. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Now I have questions to all three our guests. What role does DADAT play in implementing this resolution? Marcio, I believe that DADAT is filling an answer to a need. We all want to assess ourselves, and we're trying to do that on a continuous basis, but what we lack is a method, a broader accepted methodology. So it's good to compare ourselves with others. And if we can't do that if you don't have any assessment. Then we have a platform for cooperation, as we have in CIAT with more than 100 countries. And that has a recognized methodology. And let me give you an example. I, years ago, spoke to a director who told me about DADAT. And he said, well, I don't need DADAT because I know where my problems lie. Well, that's maybe what you think. If I listen to you, we continue to realize that we keep on asking for resources. And these resources are not coming because they don't have confidence in the director or the tax administrations, because these resources are scarce. Resources for tax administrations. In order to improve their weaknesses. But when they have a tadat, it makes all the difference. I always recommend this, and I say this, if you don't have it at that, do that right now. Brazil had a TADAT assessment. That was a way of helping our federal states because TADAT represents a diagnostic tool that is validated by organizations as the IMF, the OECD, and many others that enables the head of a tax administration to say, well, this is what we need. And we have to remedy some weaknesses and maintain what we do well, depending on the score that we obtain, A to D. And for example, use of modern technology where they can improve. So this is not something that the director would think. That would be an assessment made by TADAT. And then that can be presented to the parliament, to the president. And I think that is a great benefit because how respected a director might be, you, if you say, I have to improve on risk management and A, B, and C, well, the question is which resources you have and which weaknesses do you have? Or you can say, I have a TADAT pointing out all of this and come up with recommendations and an action plan to address challenges. And that can be a basis to address weaknesses.
Thank you very much, Marcio. How about you, Gonzalo? Thanks very much. Well, I think Marcio really hit the nail on the head in underscoring the importance of Tadat per se. I can focus on CIAT and the administration that is under my purview. We work a great deal on cooperation based on international understanding. And one of our greatest responsibilities is precisely how to pick and choose the best cooperation programs among the countries, because it is often the case that countries come to us to say, we need this or we need that, and it's priority. And very often that assessment of priority is fairly subjective unless there is not something solid to buttress that claim, unless there is a particular juncture that is obvious in particular tax administration. It is important to make a difference between what may appear to be expeditious for a moment may not necessarily be the way to go over time. And it is for us to make that distinction and to do so with fewer risks involved. Because as Marcio said, what you want here in tax administration is vision. It isn't just what a particular commissioner sees as the most critical challenge. All of this has to be grounded in fact. And frankly, we have found that Tadat serves exactly that purpose. It shores up our assessment of what a particular country may need at a particular point in time. Perhaps there's a specific indicator that must be judiciously included in a project. So Tadat is very useful. Also, I might add, from an academic standpoint, when one is structuring particular talks or academic approaches, well, with Tadat indicators, you are on solid ground to cover the areas that really are the most challenging. Thank you. Thank you, Gonzalo. Santiago, over to you. Well, I have a feeling everything has been said. And by the way, very timely and very accurately. If one is asked, well, what do you think about this or that tax reform? We, like any other, want good coordination. We want the information to be transparent, and we also look for democratic oversight. But there has to be experience. You can't have an amateurish approach at these things. And I think that gives us the grounding we need and the openness and transparency of information that can be conducted from an expert in an expert way. International cooperation and such as it is offered by organizations such as the one I represent complement complement the other. And the ISORA tool, for instance, is another example. Basic indicators that administrations need are covered there. And there isn't just one or two. 150 administrations have now signed up. And because of its transparency, because of the fact that all of this is subject to the public eye, it becomes fairly trustworthy. So I think Tadat is very nicely, tallies nicely, and is very compatible with the other instruments, all going in the same direction. Well, I thank you as well. Time is fleeting, and we have, alas, but a few minutes, and I will use them to thank each of you of our colleagues in CIAT. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to hear you review your own experience in the area. And I'd like as well to offer my audience, our audience, to join us on the 22nd of June at 10 a.m. Washington, D.C. time, Eastern Standard Time, where we will have Marcio Verdi as well, together with Mr. Emilio Pineda of the Inter-American Development Bank, as well as Albert Estrada of the World Bank, for a conversation on cooperation in Latin America among the tax administrations. So I invite you to join us then, to those who are hearing us. Are there any final words that some of you may wish to offer? I always turn my mic off, and how about your camera? We want to see you. Well, I touched it by mistake. Here you go. Here I am. Yes. Well, it remains for me to thank you, Annette, Justin, and all of you for having invited me to be part of this. Is always a great encounter. And I personally, and I know I'm not alone, I'm finally breathing a little more easily as we are emerging from one crisis after another. And we are also emerging from a very successful 10-year BEPS program. Some of us are more advanced than others. Others may spend another 10 years. I think we all will in one way or another. But the impact will be exponential. We have had an erosion of tax bases, of VAT and income that developed countries don't have in the same way, if at all. So we have our work written out for us. And it is only via the surety of international cooperation and tools like Tadat that we can move forward with confidence. That's what I would have to say. I look forward to hearing my colleagues. Thank you. Let me too take the opportunity to express my gratitude for this forum to share ideas and to speak to Tadat. Tadat, quite frankly, it makes you think, well, how come we didn't have this before? What took us so long? And with regard to international taxation, I would simply say that that is a recurrent theme. You may be certain that another 2, maybe 3 general assemblies will not pass before international taxation is yet again in the crosshairs. In 2006 and in 2007, this seemed to be a very pointy-headed issue. Only PhDs and theoreticians wondered about international taxation. Since then, we've realized that this is for all of us, and it had better be, because a developed country may have a lot of resources, and taxation and avoidance um, and evasion may exist to a degree, but it has a different impact in other places. Thank you. I finally would like to join with my colleagues in offering a resounding vote of thanks. I think the collaboration that we represent here in Tadat, and perhaps we have been overly lengthy or not lengthy enough in explaining it, but we're here for you. And yet again, at the risk of repeating myself, look into the web. This has a lot to offer. I very much recommend that you look into our website to see what the world tax administrations are doing and what the information is there that will make a difference to your own understanding and that of your citizens. That's what I would say. Well, thank you very much. A, a great affectionate greeting from Washington, D.C. to all of you. I say again, on June 22nd, Marcio will be with us again to share his wisdom with us, to speak to the World Bank and to the IDB. And another very short plug to the Tadat community. All of you who have your Tadat certificates, let me advise you that Tadat Connect is a new initiative. I commend it to you. It's a platform that will offer a very good opportunity to join in a network of other tax administrations in a free exchange of ideas, dialogue. So if you're interested, please let us know. Tadat Secretariat, actually, it should be secretariat at tadat.org. Secretariat at tadat.org. We're here for you. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a good day. Thank you.